Now, US President Donald Trump has made history this weekend by naming his third US Supreme Court nominee, Midwest conservative Catholic woman Amy Coney Barrett. The 9 Supreme Court justices are appointed for life, which means that at 48, Barrett could serve for another 4 decades potentially, with her nomination tipping the scales even more for a 6-3 conservative majority on the court. Here's Trump making the announcement just a short while ago.
This should be a straightforward and prompt confirmation. Should be very easy. Good luck. It's going to be very quick. I'm sure it'll be extremely non-controversial.
I would assume this role to serve you. I would discharge the judicial oath, which requires me to administer justice without respect to persons, do equal right to the poor and rich, and faithfully and impartially discharge my duties under the United States Constitution.
The Judiciary Committee will now hold hearings, and Senate Republicans are planning a fast-paced schedule to confirm the new justice before the election in case there are delayed or disputed results. Now, the Supreme Court is now at the forefront of the political battleground and the culture wars, and Barrett is set to become one of the most divisive and the most attacked women in America. Joining me now to discuss this is former Foreign Minister and former Australian High Commissioner to the UK, Alexander Downer. Welcome to the program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sharri. It's a pleasure.
Now, Amy Coney Barrett's nomination is now quite clearly the biggest political issue of the presidential election. Greg Sheridan has written in a piece this weekend in The Australian that for Trump, it offers the trifecta of energising his base, changing the subject from pandemic management, and reminding millions of evangelical Christians and conservative Catholics why they voted for him in 2016. Do you agree? Do you think this could turn the outcome of the election in Trump's favour?
Well, first of all, I think, if you're to believe the polls, and they would have improved the polling technique this time compared to 4 years ago, you would expect Biden to win, because Biden's lead, although his lead has shrunk a bit, his lead hasn't shrunk a lot, and it's been fairly constant. So as a result of that, you would expect Biden to win. However, what is really holding Trump back is the coronavirus issue and the way it's been managed. So the more he can get the conversation onto other topics, and the more they can be on ground that is fertile for him, the better. And this whole issue of the appointment of the new Supreme Court judge, the choice of Amy Barrett, who's obviously a very experienced, albeit rather young, and so far, as I can see, not terribly controversial appointment, is a great way of Trump, if you like, changing the conversation and getting the public to think about something else. And it will help to energize conservatives in America. And it may help him a little bit, but not a lot, but a little bit.
I mean, you say that at the moment Biden's on track to win, citing the polls, and on the basis that they might have improved since the last election. But, Trump was behind Hillary Clinton right until the end. The media reports at the time were almost saying that Hillary Clinton was the new president. Don't you have any, concerns, or do you think it is possible that, the same thing will happen again? And that the polls will be wrong because, at this point, according to some polls, Biden is only 7 points ahead.
Yeah, less than that. I think the average should be about 6.5%. However, there are a whole lot of things which are random here. First of all, the turnout in the election, the percentage of people who vote. Will there be a high turnout or a low turnout? So I think that's part of the problem with Biden. He doesn't energize the Democratic Party base. He's an unexciting, slightly lost candidate. He seems to me to be a very weak candidate, Biden. So he won't energize the base. That affects the turnout where they have voluntary voting. The second thing is it's an electoral college system. It's not the election isn't decided by who gets the most votes. It's decided by who gets the most electoral college votes. So it's a bit like an Australian election. You can actually win an election in Australia and get fewer votes than the losing party. because you have to win electorates to win an election. You have to win a majority in the House of Representatives or in the Legislative Assembly. So the electoral college system works a little bit like that. And the gap between Biden and Trump is probably narrower if you take predictions of what will happen in the electoral college into account.
Just in terms of foreign policy topics, are there any areas where you think Biden would actually be a riskier option than Trump?
Well, I think he wouldn't start off by having a very different foreign policy, because I think, to be frank, whatever you think of Donald Trump as a person and his personal behaviour, I think that's one thing. But another is, I think his foreign policy has, on the whole, been very good. He's done a remarkable thing in the Middle East, bringing the Israelis together with the Bahrainis and the Emiratis. It's an extraordinary achievement. So that shouldn't be underestimated. So on China, Trump and Biden are likely to have a very similar position. My concern about Biden is that he's weak. And because he's weak, because he doesn't really have any particular agenda, there'll be others within his cabinet and within his administration who will decide the agenda or argue about the agenda. And he'll place much more emphasis on, multilateral institutions and the like, the kind of design of policy that the liberal left prefer, and less emphasis on doing the kind of radical things that Trump has done in the Middle East. And, Trump had a crack at trying to fix the North Korean issue. I know he wasn't successful, but it just shows that Trump is prepared to take risks. And Trump is brave. The thing about Trump is he doesn't scare easily. Biden looks to me like a guy who would scare quite easily.
Just drawing on the Middle East deal that you just referenced between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, of course, under Trump's sponsorship, you revealed in a piece just a few days ago that you actually visited Israel last year with John Howard and other dignitaries as well, and that while you were there, you went to Ramallah to meet with the Palestinian Prime Minister, Mohammed Shtayyeh. But you say that other than expressing grievances, when you asked him what his plan was to achieve peace with Israel, he couldn't answer.
He wouldn't answer. I mean, that's right, because they don't have a plan. This is the problem with the Palestinians. Back in 2000, when Yasser Arafat was their leader, at the Camp David summit with Bill Clinton, the Israelis and the Americans, having had all of their plans rejected by Yasser Arafat, said, well, okay, you put your plan on the table and let's use that as the basis of negotiation. And Yasser Arafat said he wouldn't do that. Well, the Palestinians are in the same position today. We asked the Palestinian Prime Minister, this is a year ago now, nearly a year ago, we asked him to explain what his plan was. Sure, there were grievances, but what's the plan? And he had no plan. And I said to him, you need to sit down with Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and start a process of discussion and mutual trust building. And I mean, all he could say was, well, we talked about that for a while. And he said, well, maybe you could become my advisor. And I said, well, I don't think I want to get involved in the Middle East issue at this stage of my life. But the serious point here is that without a plan, nothing is going to happen for them. And the Palestinians are now being marginalized by the other Arabs, by the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. They all recognize Israel. They need to get on with life. And they're worried about Iran and coronavirus and their economies and so on. They haven't got time any longer to worry about Palestinians who never come up with a solution to their problem.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating how this deal has, as you say, marginalised the Palestinians. Look, just very quickly before you go, and I know it's a big question, but you are the former foreign minister, so I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this, on China's relationship with Australia. It is clearly deteriorating. It has been for some time, but now we have, the detainment and interrogation of journalists, to tariffs on more and more of our products. There have been some, like Paul Kelly in The Australian, who've argued that if Australia was maybe more nuanced or less provocative, we could get the relationship with China back on track. Do you think, Mr. Downer, that the onus is on Australia to do more to improve relationships, to improve relations with China? And if so, what should we be doing?
Well, I often agree with Paul Kelly, but I don't really think that's right. I think China's relationships, not just with Australia, but with many countries, Western countries particularly, has deteriorated because the foreign policy of Xi Jinping is a very different foreign policy than the policy that was pursued from Deng Xiaoping, back in the late 1970s, the early 1980s, through Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao when we, the Howard government, were in office. This is nowadays a very aggressive diplomacy, a very assertive diplomacy. And I think the coronavirus issue has probably made them even more assertive because obviously there is a sense of guilt in China about how this all happened, remember, their initial resistance to some sort of international investigation into coronavirus and the huge damage that it's done to the whole world, the whole planet. So they are much more aggressive. And I think if you look weak in dealing with them, they won't respect you. We don't have to be rude. We can be polite. Our door is always open to discuss issues with their leaders, their ministers. And we're happy to have a constructive relationship with China, but they have to abide by international law, not circumvent it, not try to change the status quo by the use of force. So we have to stand up for our beliefs and the sort of world that we think will work best, not just cave into them.
Mr. Downer, I so appreciate your insights and your time on a Sunday evening. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Sharri.